Our Western herbal tradition is based upon the rich heritage of the North American Indians, European tradition, Northern Europe, Southern the Mediterranean, and the Middle East, which would include Greek Arabic medicine. Some of the great doctors that influenced our tradition were the medieval Persians like Ibn Sina, way off here, and they communicated across the crossroads all the way to China, Chinese medicine. Tibetan medicine is related to Chinese, Indian, and Greek medicine. All these ideas cross-fertilizing to some extent through the Middle East, North Africa, the Roman, and so after the Roman period too. We owe perhaps the most gratitude, though, to the North American Indians, and many of our remedies come from North America. And you can pretty much tell, the old days when I worked in the herb store, there was about 350 herbs and on the in the shelves on the wall in the jars, and a lot of them were roots and barks, and almost any root and bark that is a North American herb from the Indians, because the Indians believed in the use of the root and bark, whereas the Europeans tended to use the herb, and you can see why when you start out with a bunch of culinary herbs in southern France. You know, your tradition starts in Provence or Italy or Crete or Israel or North Africa, and you're dealing with lavender, rosemary, thyme, sage, dill, fennel, angelica. Angelica would be Northern European, excuse me. You have all these beautiful culinary herbs, and you use the herbs, the scented part. And that tends to be the whole tradition in Europe. Come over here, the Indians followed the bear around because the bear is the most like a human in its physiognomy and its appearance and in its physiology in a way, because the bear can stand up and walk on two legs if it has to for a short distance. So it looks a lot like a man, and as I've heard from the Indian people, when you skin out a bear, the flesh looks a lot like a human being. The organs are also in a similar place. So the Indians figured what the bear ate would be good for them, and what the bear used for medicine would also be good for them. They learned to watch the food and the medicine that the bear used. And they followed the bear around. So if a person dreams about the bear, that means they have bear medicine. That means that they are a food provider or an herbalist, medicine maker or provider for the people. And so the bear has long claws, and it would claw off the bark and dig up the roots. And because of that, we tended to, the North American Indians tended to like to use the roots and barks. Also, it may have been a preservation issue that they just preserve easier, not having them in glass bottles and stuff. The bark and the root is more inert. And they also use the leaves and the fruit and so on. But you go and you look at those 350 jars at an herb store, you find that most of the roots and barks are from North America. And if you go back and you read up, most of them you can find that they came from the Indians. Not all of them. Sometimes the reason has been lost. But I say this all because I ran across this ridiculous essay that scientist wrote that said that, well, there were only 10 herbs that the Indians taught the white people, and the sassafras, bloodroot, sarsaparilla, blah blah blah. And the Indians and the white people were always enemies, and they never learned anything from each other. And it's like, duh! Didn't he notice that there's a bunch of Indians still living in Massachusetts, next to white people, all intermarried with them, and that the Indians intermarried also with black people, and there's half-bloods all across this whole country. Don't you think they did talk to each other sometimes? And the Indians often did Indian medicine for the white people and were uh, given, remuneration for their work. And I remember one old Maine farmer saying, "Yeah, I'd much rather been treated by those old squaws, as he called them, than the white doctors. They always were better doctoring, and they weren't as painful in their medicines." So that was just a time, just recently, just early 20th century, even the Indians were still famous for their wood lore and their knowledge of medicine. And perhaps they still are, but they should be more so, better known today. People are so oblivious today, but the Indians were probably the greatest woodsman, wood lore people in the world, and also their knowledge of herbs was deepest because they were conjunct the herbs, the plants, and the animals in the world soul. They dreamed about the plants and the animals, and through their dreams they knew they were conjunct. They knew their friends and foes. They knew their cousins in the natural world intimately through dream time. We are all related, as the Indian people say, or at least as the Dakota say. See, this would be a different type of signature. This is called the spirit signature, when the plant looks like an animal or it's used by an animal. So we have various animals called snakeweeds that look like snakes, and they're used to treat snake bites and toxicity and stuff like that. So let's do a census. There's snakeweed, that's plantain. The little head looks like a little snake's head. There's black cohosh, that's black snake root. The tops look like a snake's head. One of the most powerful one is Virginia snake root, Aristolochia serpentaria. So that's a stimulant for low feverish conditions. John Heinerman, who's written some herbal books based more on food and food use of herbs, he says he was at a convention one time and he met an English doctor who treated flesh-eating strep or staph disease, when that was a big deal when it was first appeared. And he said, "Well, what did you do for that?" And he said, "Oh, the person's relatives went to a village herbalist and got some Aristolochia serpentaria homeopathic 12X, and they gave him that, and that stopped it." I thought that's the perfect remedy for, because it's a stimulant and it stimulates. So you want that stimulation to open up the peripheral circulation, and that was pretty amazing. Didn't hear about that in the newspaper, of course.
No, I didn't.
Just heard about the flesh-eating staph or strep or whatever it was. Then, yeah, now the MRSA is showing up on beaches and stuff, It was just in hospitals before. So, let's see. So then there'd be Canada snake root. That's wild ginger. That's a cousin of Aristolochia. Oh, I asked an Indian, "Well, that doesn't look like a snake." And she said, "Oh no, in the spring when all the little heads are coming up, look like little snakes' heads, all when they're about that high." Kansas snake root. That's Echinacea. Senega snake root, that's the great snake root. That's Polygala senega, Senega snake root. That's still actually picked and sold in commerce for regular medicine in some countries in Europe. One of my friends who lived on the Red Lake Reservation, she looked at the census of 1900, and about half the people listed as their occupation snakeroot digger. And we found that they'd go up along the edge of the prairie in the woods all the way up to central Manitoba, collecting snakeroot. And then Manitoba is still the main exporter of snakeroot, the senega, which is used for bronchitis and bronchial pneumonia. It was introduced by Linnaeus, actually. So then there's rattlesnake master, Eryngium, that grows in Wisconsin. And there's another name for that one is button snakeroot, but that's also a name for Liatris or Gayfeather, which is its horticultural name in the flower shop, but the Indians called that button snakeroot or corn snakeroot. Then there's rattlesnake plantain, which is an orchid. Beautiful little, that's Goodyera. Goodyera with an A on the end. You've probably seen that if you've been out in the woods, even if you didn't know what it was. Looks like snake hide. So, snake remedies.